I think the part of fighting games that most of us enjoy the most, the part that I think people talk about being the most fun and interesting, is when fighting games first come out and nobody knows anything that's happening at all. You're discovering the game, you're learning a bunch of stuff. Every time you fight against a new character or person or whatever, you're like, I've never seen that before in my life. What is even happening? And the longer the game goes on, especially without frequent updates, the closer to like perfect players can play. Something I thought was extremely interesting as a comparison to the pace that fighting games evolve and change and are out. Over in TFT, it's a game that changes pretty dramatically very often. Every 3 or 4 months, there's a brand new set, has entirely new units and traits and costumes / cosmetics for you Street Fighter fans. The game also patches every 2 weeks for reference. Something they just announced. Augments are like really important, impactful choices you make 3 times a game. And basically, what would happen is every time you were unsure of what augment to take, you would look at a stat site, and the site would say, this augment is pretty good, this augment's kind of okay, this one's kind of crappy. I'm gonna pick this one because it must be the best augment of these ones. They'll go and like check all of the sites and see which optimally is the best choice to make. Informed decisions by stats. They are removing augment selection from match history, therefore removing it from stat sites. And I find this so fascinating. Stats really aren't a thing in fighting games to the same level. We have some, right? You guys know Cat Cammy. We talk about Cat Cammy on the stream. Battle stats based on the average number of ranked players for each characters, how often they use their supers, parries, and like, you know, we have stuff like this, but it doesn't really, it's not the same. TFT, I think players and developers are terrified of the game being solved. They're terrified of people knowing the most optimal, best way to play the game. They tend to believe that it's very, very boring once you make it to the end game and everybody knows everything about the game, and it's just about who can play the game the cleanest and like who gets lucky and like, you know, some other factors in there. They really are not a fan of that style of thing, which is the opposite of fighting games. Like Street Fighter released one big patch at the start of the season. They released a little tiny kind of like half patch with a couple of adjustments to a couple of characters. And that's basically its entire updates for the year. Like right now, this version of the game, I would say most people have it pretty solved. They know it's good. They know it's not so good. Do we have perfect information about what all the characters can do? No. Is it easy to rank who is the best or the worst? Exactly, no, but people have like a pretty good idea about the way this version of the game is. Even though when I watch the game, I see new stuff that I haven't seen before quite often, but like we're kind of at that point. It's about as solved as like a fighting game patch will be. Whereas in TFT, they still don't want to make it even close to there, that there's no training mode or like sandbox mode in the game that allows you to test like what 3 items do the most damage on this character, or what is like the best way to build this composition, like what's the most efficient, what makes this the most tanky. You can't test these things in like a sandbox training mode because they're afraid that you would optimize the game too quickly. Rather than experiment and explore the large amount of content, players rush to conclusions based on the data. This has come up in fighting games before. There's a discussion about Harada where he basically says like, it is of course possible to display the frame data within the game, which is every fighting game now just has frame data in the game, right? It's like a normal thing and all the websites track it and have it too. But I wouldn't do it. Including the entire frame data, the time and range of an attack's data into the game, there are things to consider when you give players access to this data. If players could easily have access to such data within the game, it would allow players to uncover and find out the intricacies and details about characters and their moveset much faster, which can lead to an impact on the game's lifespan. This also has an effect on the players who like to strategize and discuss the game's characters and balance, since all their arguments will no longer be arguments, since there will be the ultimate authority, a word of God. Not an uncommon opinion, by the way. There are people who believe this exact kind of thought. Like, yeah, every game having frame data now is worse for the game because you just know everything about the game very quickly. Games are solved so much faster these days in every element. How often do you see like a new Call of Duty comes out and someone's flying through the air, spinning like a fucking frisbee around corners and like killing people and shit, and they're like, the sweats found new movement tech, and everybody's pissed. The faster you move, the cooler you can do things. The more you know about the game and you can exploit that knowledge to do sick stuff, the better for a lot of players, right? Versus some people who really enjoy when the game is like not solved and no one knows how to play it. Some top players really like this. Some top players really hate this. Some casual players really like this. Some casual players really hate this. I know lots of new players who are like, I don't like playing TFT because every 4 months the game is completely different. There's a bunch of new stuff. I can't remember what any of the units do. I don't like it. Whereas I know the good players are like, yeah, the game gets solved like a month and a half into the set. Everybody knows how everything works. It's like over or whatever, right? There's such a difference between the needs of the players to find the right middle ground of like which is which. It's super fascinating to see the difference. They have tried this before, by the way. TFT has done this before in a different set. It happened right before I started playing TFT. They're doing it again after not liking how it turned out last time and wanting to change up how they do it a little bit. For my money, I really like games that change a lot. I like adapting and learning and doing new things. I am totally cool with fast game pace cycles that force you to try new things and adapt and adjust. The kinds of video games I like are games with lots of situational awareness, variable factors that change quite often so that you have to come up with like new ideas or solutions. It's why I like battle royale games a lot. It's why I like roguelike games a lot. It's why I like MOBAs, especially the ones that change more often, because just, you know, you have different team compositions, different items that get buffed or changed or nerfed, different hero abilities, all kinds of stuff. It's also what I like fighting games. Even though they don't change as often as many other games, the situational awareness and like game pace of them means that solving and doing the right things in them and the speed that they're played is really hard. Our games change so infrequently by comparison. And you do see changes. When Rashid came out, most people didn't think he was bad. They thought he was pretty middling. It turns out that he was one of the best characters in the game. Ed came out and most people thought he was like middling or low tier. And it turns out with no adjustments to the character, he went to top 1 in a lot of people's mind. He got like a nerf on his level 2 in like the last small patch and he went up after that. That kind of stuff happens decently often. Sometimes it doesn't though. I mean, when Aki came out, I think most people thought she was pretty whatever. She got a bunch of buffs. People thought she'd be even better, like top 5, top 10, like super duper strong. I think she's still like in the middle somewhere. Akuma and Bison came out. I think immediately it was clear they were very powerful. That hasn't changed. So it's not like people always miss. And there are times where I think the perspective on characters changes quite a lot, actually. Like when Happy Chaos came out, some people were unsure about how good or bad he was in Strive, but then very quickly he became very, 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 very powerful. Whereas some other characters like Abba came out, people thought she was kind of whatever. Then I think people thought she was like really good. And I think then it swung back a little bit to like, well, she's good, but she has some problems. Like watching the Wazzler play Marvel 2, dude, he comes up with new stuff in Marvel 2 constantly, which is a game that has characters that have like 4 attacks and like 3 special moves and they all suck. He's just like, let me come up with some TOD with this shit team. And he finds something with him that's like very good. And you're just like, okay. So it makes versus games interesting. The answer to almost every question you have is usually yes. You're not like, what do the devs want me to do with this character? Okay, let's do that. It's more like, I have the character. What kind of nasty shit can I do? They didn't want me to do any of this shit, but I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah, and then you pick that team against MSP and you can't play the game. But that's kind of how the game is, right? And it's a game made 20 years ago or whatever. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. More modern toolboxes that are a little bit more sensibly designed and can get updated more often, you have that problem a lot less, right? Obviously, mastering a fighting game character is a lot more work, I think, than building a comp in TFT, but there's still a learning curve to both of those things. It's just so different than how our games are. It's funny how everybody feels this way, huh? Like, I think this happens in every game. Every time Call of Duty comes out, I read people who are saying like, oh man, this Call of Duty game is getting optimized out by the sweats. The sweats are dolphin dive 360 no-scoping, Superman gliding, frisbee golfing through the doors and killing me in skill-based matchmaking. And I'm like, oh shit. There's a lot of people who would be very, very, very happy if you had like no frame data and you knew nothing was going on. There are people like that who are like, yeah. What up, Boot? Got a little bow tie on. Got his little job interview. He's all clocked in. How you doing, Boot?